This is my review of the movie If. If is written and directed by John Krasinski, who you, of course, know as Jim Halpert from The Office. But he also wrote and directed A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place Part 2, which I thought were really good original movies. And so I was going to be in on whatever he did next, even though this movie is totally different in style and tone. Although it does share one very important thing in common with those movies, which is obviously important to Krasinski, and that's a strong family element. Ifs, of course, refers to imaginary friends, as we know from the preview, and our introduction to this world is a girl named Bee, who is played by Kaylee Fleming, who I wasn't familiar with, but she was on the show The Walking Dead, which was hugely popular, so I think a lot of people probably know who she is or recognize her. But she can see these imaginary friends, and her introduction to the world is also through a man named Cal, who's played by Ryan Reynolds, and he can see these imaginary friends, but he has seemingly seen them for a lot longer, and he's a little more jaded by the whole ordeal. And together, they're going to try to work to help out these ifs to find new connections, and so that they can, I guess their whole function is to help out kids and have a connection with one. That's what we know from the previews, but I gotta say, the movie is actually a lot heavier than that. It's a lot more about grief and mourning. And the movie begins with a montage that I would compare to the opening of the movie Up. John Krasinski is in this movie. I don't know if you realize that. I didn't know that going in. She plays the girl's father, and he spends a lot of this movie in the hospital, so he is barely in it. But I'm going to go ahead and say I think John Krasinski gave himself the best part of this movie. I thought he was really charming in his role, and frankly, I would rather see a movie that was a lot more about him and his relationship with his daughter. That said, that's not the movie that this was. So let's talk about what this movie was. The pros of this movie is that it has a really good cast. Reynolds is always likable. Krasinski was very charming in this. I thought the girl, Kaylee Fleming, did a really good job. That said, I don't think this was one of those child performances where I'm like, wow, that person's really got it. They're going to be great throughout their career. I just thought she did it really well, even though I wasn't like really charmed by her performance. This movie has great visuals. The ifs are all very creatively done, and it has a lot of heart and charm. There were moments that got me a little emotional because the movie does that well. The cons of this movie are that I'm not really sure who this movie is for. Of course, on the surface, you would think a movie about imaginary friends starring a girl who's in the movie 12 would be a movie for kids, and I think it is that, but it also has a very slow pace, and as I mentioned, has very heavy themes. It takes a while before the ifs really show up, and so I am very curious to see how kids will actually respond to this. In the world of movies like the Minions movies, will kids respond to a movie more like this? I do think it's a lot of maybe for adults who can get very sentimental, thinking about childlike things. My theater had a lot of adults in it who I thought responded to this movie. I just don't know that I see a lot of like my adult friends watching this movie and responding. There is a heavy focus on heart and charm. I don't think there was as much of a focus on the humor. I thought there was humor in it, but it wasn't like a man, this movie has a whole lot of laughs. So in the end, I'm going to give this movie a C. I'm going to just split it right down the middle. I think it's kind of balanced out by the fact that it is incredibly well made. I think that John Krasinski did a good job of taking this world seriously, and he put a lot of charm, like I said, into this movie. So it's very effective at parts. But, and I'm going to put a spoiler warning here because I can't really talk about how I feel about this movie without talking about things that are spoilery. So if you don't want it ruined, stop watching. It was fairly obvious to me early in the movie that the twist was going to be that B was imagining all of the imaginary friends all along. And that was the case. And it's sort of a coping mechanism, I guess you would say, for the grief that she was going through. But because of that, it ultimately made you never really cared about the ifs. I was never concerned about their whole world. It made it seem pretty inconsequential. As long as she turned out okay in the movie, really what I wanted from this movie is I had the most fun in the movie when the ifs weren't around. I thought that John Krasinski's character was very charming, and I would have liked to see a movie just about him and his daughter and the way that they related. I think would have been more interesting to me. That said, I'm really curious to hear, I always say this, what other people think about the movie, but particularly with this one, because I just don't know how people are going to respond to it. this movie could go either way. Either it could be a huge success that everybody's like, yeah, they find something for everybody in this movie, or it could be a movie where it's sort of because it's a little for everybody, but not particularly for anybody, that maybe nobody connects to it. So if you see this movie, please let me know because I want to know how everyone feels about If.